Well, welcome. Last time we got together, I asked you a couple of questions about things that were new but not so improved, and I hope you had some great answers. This week, I'm going to ask you a similar question. If you grew up in church, and you had very, very devout or religious parents, or maybe, grandparents, or maybe you didn't grow up in church and you had friends that had what you thought were really bizarre rules, really strange things that they had to do or couldn't do based on kind of this religious stuff that now you look back on and go, man, that's it's a little strange. I don't know where they came up with that. I don't know what it was. I remember I didn't really grow up in church, but I had some friends that weren't allowed to play with face cards, which I didn't even know was a thing, so they played with rook cards, right? You couldn't play with face cards because you might just start gambling, and gambling was bad, or you couldn't listen to music, secular music, which I didn't even know what secular music was until I got involved with the church. Maybe you couldn't watch movies, or your friends couldn't watch movies. I became a Christian at 16, and there were some friends of mine that were in the church whose parents had gone to a symposium or a seminar on why 4/4 beats in music were bad, and you should never listen to that, right? Or maybe you had to wear certain clothes to church, or you couldn't drink, smoke, or chew, or hang out with girls that do. I don't know. You couldn't read certain books. You couldn't watch certain movies. You couldn't play certain games that had to deal with wizards and magic and all the like. Maybe you couldn't go to the theater. Maybe you couldn't go bowling. Maybe you couldn't get a tattoo. And not because, you just weren't old enough, but because it was against the religion. Or you couldn't play Pokemon, or you couldn't say words like shoot or darn. You couldn't go to a Halloween carnival, maybe, I don't know. But you could go to a fall festival that looked really, really similar. You dressed up, but it wasn't Halloween. It was very much fall festival, right? And I don't know what it was. There could have been 1,000 things. Today, we're going to talk about religious hypocrisy. Religious hypocrisy, and that's a big deal. I would say that it is one of the biggest problems that we have to deal with as Christians, and it's one of the biggest problems Christianity has to overcome today for the message to go out. And I would say that most religions deal with it, if not all. I mean, maybe all of them do. I guess if there's a religion with no obedience and no rules, maybe it doesn't deal with that. But I would also go a step further and say that all systems and structures deal with hypocrisy in one form or another. Well, what is hypocrisy? What is it? The easiest way is to memorize this little limerick. Rules for thee, but not for me. Rules for thee, here's what you got to do, here's what you can't do. That's for you, but not really for me. Rules for thee, but not for me. Now, let me just tell you, we here at Grace Church, we are asking God to bring us folks that have been hurt and wounded and hurt by church and wounded by church and hurt by church people. And let me tell you, I would say a huge majority of those people that we encounter, that we run across that have been hurt by church and church people have been hurt by religious hypocrisy. Religious hypocrisy is so damaging. Right, and it looks so similar. And like I said, it's not just religion, it's built into our DNA as humans. I mean, I really want you to follow the rules, but I don't want to. The rules are for you, but not for me. Rules for thee and not for me. It's built into almost everything that we have. It probably is in our DNA somewhere. It's in politics. In Mark Twain's autobiography, he says, look at the tyranny of party, at what is called party allegiance or party loyalty, a snare invented by designing men for selfish purposes, which turns voters into chattels, slaves, rabbits, all the while their masters and they themselves are shouting rubbish about liberty, independence, freedom of opinion, freedom of speech, honestly unconscious of the fantastic contradiction. You would think that Mark Twain is talking about today's politics, but he wasn't, because it always is like that. You saw this in the last year with COVID restrictions. Oh, rules for thee, but not for me, right? I mean, one of my favorites was a list of all the elected officials and government employees that were saying, here are the rules, you must follow the rules, while they actively weren't. I mean, one politician got busted down in Acapulco giving a stay-at-home order as the mayor of the city, saying, you must stay at home, you must stay at home, while he was in Acapulco. Or one mayor going on and saying, you got to do this, you got to stay at home, and then flying to another state. And we've seen it. You see it in companies. Hey, there's a budget shortfall. Everybody's got to tighten their belt. And yet, the people at the top spend lavishly. They spend lavishly, right? We see it in higher education. People are asked, if you want to be a professor, a teacher, you want to be involved in higher education, you must run the gauntlet of poverty, and some have compared it to slave labor, to get this all-encompassing tenure, which means, man, it's really hard to fire you, and you make a lot of money, and maybe you don't work as hard as you did for all those years while you were on the bottom. Wherever you look, there it is. And Christianity is no different. Christianity is no different. We found out this year that Ravi Zacharias, an incredible speaker, founder of a great ministry, one of the greatest apologists of the 21st century, was a sexual predator who would preach against sexual immorality, all the while we found out later was practicing it. Rules for thee, but not for me. See, Jesus had a lot to say about this too. Jesus has a lot to say about this if you read the gospel accounts. In Matthew 7, Jesus says, oh, you hypocrite. When you're dealing with somebody else's problem, take the log out of your own eye. Take the 2x4 out of your own eye before you go to remove the splinter of the problem from your brother's eye. He says, beware of false prophets. They are wolves in sheep's clothing. They look one way, but they really are another. And he says, woe to you hypocrites who pray and fast to be seen and be heard by others. You're hypocrites. He had a lot to say about the religious leaders of his day, the Pharisees, the Sadducees. He calls the Pharisees whitewashed tombs. That's damning. He says, oh, you give a little bit, and you really go the extra mile in all these details about generosity, but you know what you don't do? You don't pursue justice. And even Jesus, when he was asked to defend, he says, hey, your disciples, they break the tradition of, you too, Jesus, you break the tradition of the elders. Why do they do that? Why don't they follow the law of God? And Jesus tells them, you hypocrites. You people honor me with your lips, but your heart is far from me. They worship me in vain, because they really are following these human rules. You read Matthew 23. Matthew 23 is all about teaching against hypocrisy. He goes so far as to say, listen, you would cross the entire sea to make a single convert. which we would at that point go, man, that's really good. That's dedication. And he says you would cross the entire sea to make a single convert, and yet what you do is you convert that person into twice the child of hell as you are. Harsh words. Harsh words about religious hypocrisy. And this religious hypocrisy is the same fight Paul is fighting against in his letter to the church in Galatia. In Galatians, we've already seen he is begging, he is pleading, and now he's about to make his own case based on his personal testimony of why the gospel they are turning to is not a gospel at all. It's a false gospel. And the gospel that they had turned to that Paul preached, that's the real gospel. He says, you are teaching, you are turning to this false gospel that's no gospel at all because it can't save you. And in fact, it tries to rebuild that which the real gospel already tore down. And in Galatians 1, chapter 1, verse 11, it says, "For I would have you know, brothers, that the gospel that was preached to me is not man's gospel. For I did not receive it from any man, nor was taught it, but received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ." And so he appeals and says, listen, this gospel I gave to you isn't just another kind of human teaching, because that was part of the charges being leveled against him. Paul is trying to please people. That's all he's trying to do. He's just trying to teach his own little slant on how to live. He's just one of many self-help advice givers, and so don't really follow him because his stuff isn't that good. And Paul says, no. The gospel I received was not from any person. It was from God himself. He revealed it to me. He revealed it to me. If you go to Acts 8 and 9, you can see the story about how God called him. Paul shows up on the scene in Acts 8 because he is cheering on the death of Christians. He is helping persecute and murder believers in Jesus. And the story is he gets confronted by God and says, Saul, right? That was his name, pre-Christian name. Saul, why do you persecute me? Why are you going against me? God comes to him. And so he is saying, God revealed this message to me, and he confirmed it in me with people that I knew were believers in Jesus, who knew the gospel. And he says, and you know it was true because look at my life. My life has changed dramatically. My life is radically different than it was. I mean, I went from trying to murder Christians to spreading the gospel. It's a big change. Look at me. He says, this happened because God revealed his son to me. He says, the one who has my whole life planned revealed his son to me. He called me to that. And then he said, I didn't rush to go consult with these other apostles, these leaders in the church, but I did go to Jerusalem after 3 years because I wanted to meet with Peter, with Cephas, he'll say. I wanted to meet with Cephas and Peter, the Apostle Peter, and I'm sure he learned some stuff about the gospel. I'm sure he was learning, teaching. So you see, at this time, the New Testament isn't put together like you and I know. The Gospels aren't all in one place. If you want to find out the best way, there's no movies made about Jesus. If you want to find out, you go to the source, and so he goes to Peter. And so he knows he wants to meet Peter and see, his compadre in the faith. He says, I also meet James, the brother of Jesus, the leader of the church in Jerusalem, with him and Peter. He says, but most of the other leaders in Jerusalem still didn't know me. In fact, they didn't know me until 14 years later, year 14, I show back up in Jerusalem because we had this meeting. And it wasn't to learn more about the gospel. but it was to affirm that what I was teaching was on par with what they were, what we were teaching was the same. And they agreed that what I was teaching and what they were teaching was the same. And I think it's, when I look back on these meetings, and this meeting probably refers to Acts 15 or another time whenever he is delivering aid, a collection he had gathered, a collection Paul had gathered. That Christianity isn't like it is today. At this point, Christianity kind of stands on the edge of a cliff, on a precipice, and it can go either way. It was so close if the folks who were in charge hadn't listened to God. It is so close to being just another unknown Jewish way of life. Just a Jewish subsect, a subculture within Judaism on how to be a Jewish person in a better way. It was almost that. If Paul isn't affirmed. Because the question that Paul represents is Christianity really for everyone? Or must you become a Jew and then a Christian if you want? Was the door open to everyone, or was it very narrow? Was it only open to Jews? And so Paul goes to Jerusalem to affirm this. And Paul, his independence, he is this independent guy, and he goes around. Now, he always does stuff in teams, but he is this very independent guy. But he is not a maverick, and nor is he a cultist. But his focus, his sphere of people, the people that he's trying to reach, are just very different than the Jewish leaders focused on. And he said at this meeting, there were spies. There were spies at this meeting who were sent, who were trying to cause trouble, who were really trying to push it the other way to try to make Christianity a non-factor, to make Christianity just another Jewish subsect and really not that important. And Paul says, but that's not what happened. What happened is we compared my version of the gospel and their version of the gospel, and we saw it was the same. And they said, yeah, but you should really make sure that you remember the poor. And he was like, hey, I'm already doing that. In Galatians 2:6, and he says, from those who seem to be influential. So he's trying to downplay that there is any greater than, less than people in God's kingdom. He's trying to represent it as truly a level ground at the foot of the cross. He says, so here are these so-called influential people who, let's be honest, they have influence, but they are not more important. They don't have a better revelation. They don't have a different message than Paul. He says, all these people who seem to be influential, what they were makes no difference to me, he adds. God shows no partiality. He says, those I say who seemed influential added nothing to me. They didn't say, oh, your gospel's really close, but not quite. You've got to do this. Oh, your gospel's really close. You've got to add a little more Judaism. You've got to add a little more whatever it is. And it says in verse 8, for he worked through Peter for his apostolic ministry to the circumcised. He says, so the one who gave Peter a mission to go out and evangelize all the Jews with the message of Jesus, it says, worked also through me for mine to the Gentiles. He says, so the same God that commissioned Peter to be an apostle to the Jews commissioned me to be an apostle to everybody else. It says that when James and Cephas, or Peter, and John, who seemed to be the pillars, perceived the grace that was given to me, They gave me the right hand of fellowship to Barnabas and me that we should go to the Gentiles, and they to the circumcised. They only ask us to remember the poor, which I was eager to do. He says they said nothing except for some things that I was already excited about too. He says, so this gospel I preach, this is from God. It's based on what Jesus did. It's based on what God revealed to me. It's not another nuance. It's not Judaism plus. It's not another good idea. It's not great advice. He says it's the only way to have peace with God. And it changed my life. And it was affirmed by the community. Now I want you to hang on to that it was affirmed by the community. We're going to get to that in a second. And then Paul goes into another story. He says, so God revealed it to me, and here's all the great things about that, and it was affirmed, and it was not added to, and it was affirmed by the leaders of the Jerusalem church, and they sent me off in good standing, and then this happened. And in Galatians 2, verse 11, it says, but when Cephas, or Peter, came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he stood condemned. And now, whoa. He starts off harsh. He says, when Peter came to Antioch, I confronted him because he was in the wrong. Whew. So now he tells the story, okay? He starts off with what happened. He says, for before certain men came from James. So Peter was there before these guys came from James. It says, before these guys from James came, he was eating with Gentiles. But when they came, he drew back and separated himself, fearing the circumcision party. So here's Peter, and he's acting a certain way. Hey, he rules for all of us. I can eat with you, you can eat with me. And really, because the Jews and the Gentiles ate very different food. It wasn't just like they couldn't be around each other. It was because they ate very, very different food. You know, a Jewish person couldn't eat pork, and the Gentiles are like, hey, have a BLT, here you go. Have some pork tenderloin. It's great, right? And so Peter is eating with them because in the gospel, the rules are for thee and thee and thee. It's really the rule and the law of grace. But as soon as these other folks came, he acts different. He says, ooh, no, thank you. I don't eat pork due to my religion. Sorry, Gentiles. It says not just he, it says in verse 13, the rest of the Jews acted hypocritically along with him, so that even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy. So even the one that was commissioned to go and reach the Gentiles by Peter and John and James, these pillars, said, no thanks. I'll have the vegetarian option, please. It says, but when I saw that their conduct was not in step with the truth of the gospel. And what is the truth of the gospel? That you have to eat everything? No. What is the truth of the gospel? That if you avoid certain foods, you're wrong? No. The truth of the gospel, he says, I said to Cephas before all of them, if you, though a Jew, live like a Gentile and not like a Jew, how can you force Gentiles to live like Jews? The law of love is never hypocritical. The gospel is never hypocritical. And so Paul gives us some insight on how to deal with a religious bully or a religious hypocrite. Because let me just tell you, you're going to face them. You're gonna. If you hang around with religious people enough, there are going to be hypocritical ones. Why? Because it's in all of our DNA. And that religious hypocrite you may know well, and they may not be hypocritical in every way. They may not be, it may not, it may be just towards you. It may be just towards the thing that you care about. I don't know what it is, but you're going to face religious hypocrisy. So how do you deal with it? Paul gives us a great example, is that we deal with it relationally. Jesus didn't write a book, right? He didn't write this Bible. Jesus didn't write a book. Jesus created a community. Jesus started a community that then began a movement. He did not write a book. It isn't based on a set of rules like most other things are. He created a community, and a community is a community when it is relational. And so Paul deals with this in truth and in love. You see, when you have no relationship, it is very easy to only be very truthy. That's when that's when you write an open letter to a company, because a company has no soul. You can't have a relationship with a company. So here's an open letter. Here's a condemnation. It is very easy to go on social media and blast, so the letter to the editor. See, to me, letters to the editor or the opinion piece, those were the original social media, right? You would write those in and go, you know who I think's a really big dummy? This person. Look at their dumb ideas and their dumb views and their dumb stances. And man, they were just dumb. Man, somebody needs to beat them up. Right? I mean, that's kind of what we see. But you don't do that. You don't do that when you have a relationship. I remember I had a teenager a long time ago dealing with me about something, and he sends me a text, and he was like, I think he was 13 or something, 14, and his text is like, how dare you? You call yourself a pastor, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, hey, whoa. I'll be at your house in like 5 minutes. I was like, hey, man, why don't you read this text back to me? And he was like, how dare you? You call yourself a pastor? I was like, oh, so yeah, okay. So he's like, yeah, maybe the tone might have been a little too harsh. Because and so we had a good conversation and we dealt with it. And so if you're going to deal with the religious hypocrite, it needs to be within the context of relationship. And it needs to be based in truth and in love. Because some people say, well, it's all love. Well, I just let them do whatever they want. Well, I just love them. They can do whatever they want. That's enablement. And it needs to be based on the gospel, right? And the gospel says, hey, if you're a Gentile, if you're a Jew that also lives like a Gentile, then don't force Gentiles to live like Jews. If you want to be true to the gospel, you can never say, hey, rules for thee and not for me. So you do this. I mean, Jesus talks about this in Matthew 18. How do you do discipline in a community, right? You go to somebody if they don't listen, right? Because there's an offense and there's something going on. And so you do it in this relational way. And eventually you say, you know what? The relationship is done. Until they repent. And that's the goal, is to get them to go, oh, hey, you're right. Because Paul's not trying to cancel Peter. He is not putting him on blast in front of everybody. I hope Peter never is an apostle again. That's not what he's doing. What he's really trying to do is get Peter to change his ways. Because what he knows is that when Peter lives with religious hypocrisy, he crushes people. There were people in the first, the first years of the church that were hurt by church and church people. The Apostle Peter. Because of how he lived in this religious hypocrisy. So how do you deal with the church bully? How do you deal with a religious hypocrite in truth and in love? Especially if there's someone that calls himself a leader. Especially if there's someone that calls themselves a disciple maker, if they're one in authority. But relationship is important. Because even Paul recognized that relationship was important. Paul recognized the authority of Peter. He recognized the authority of John, and he recognized the authority of James, these people that had been with Jesus. That's why he goes and says, I went to Jerusalem to make sure that I was not running in vain, to make sure that I wasn't preaching a gospel contrary to what the real gospel was, to what Jesus had said. I know God revealed it to me, but I want to make sure I didn't misunderstand it. I didn't want to misinterpret it. And so he submitted to the larger body, and that's an important thing too. Because to be a believer means that you submit yourself to one another, it says in Ephesians, respectfully. And so if you are a maverick, independent Christian that's not part of any body, I don't even know. I don't know what to call you. I don't find it in the New Testament. Because I do. It's called religious hypocrite. And so if you say, well, I'm a Christian and I follow Jesus, but I'm not part of the church. I am not part of, you know what, in fact, I hate Christians but love Jesus. 1 John will tell you you can't. Anybody says they love God but hates his brother, they're a liar. You're a religious hypocrite. Well, you know what? I just do my own thing. Why isn't Jesus enough for me? Because Jesus created a community. That's why. Well, I don't need to go to church. Okay, what does it mean to go to church? Does it mean you got to come to a church building and sing 3 songs and hear a message? I mean, that's one way to come to church. But if you're not involved in a church, in a body of believers with leadership, where there's some authority, if you're not in a body of believers that practices the sacraments, the Lord's Supper and baptism, then you are not following what Jesus has set up. And you go, well, I don't want, listen, it can be a church, if you want to be a part of a church that's 7 people, but there are people that are set up in leadership, what Paul calls in the New Testament elders. He goes around establishing elders in all the churches. You want to do that. You want to, you take up, you give generously to this community so that it can also be generous. You have leadership, you have discipleship, you are going out and trying to expand the kingdom. That doesn't matter if there's 3 people or 2 people or 10,000 or 40,000 or 100,000. But if you say, well, I'm a Christian, I just don't like church. Okay, you don't have to like it, but you need to be part of one. Or else you are a religious hypocrite. See, there is something in our DNA that causes us to live this way. We love it, right? We love rules for thee, but not for me. And religious hypocrisy, or any kind of hypocrisy, it is built into us, and it's communicable, right? It's easily transmissible. We see it in Barnabas. It says, and even Barnabas, who was sent to minister to the Gentiles, now pulled away and was trying to make them act like Jews. It says, but so often, we read in Galatians, so often we try to get back to this way of life. We are this religious hypocrite. And he says in verse 15, we ourselves are Jews by birth and not Gentile sinners. Talking about Peter and talking about himself and even, and these leaders. And yet we know that a person is not justified by works of the law, but through faith in Jesus Christ. He says, hey, we are born into God's special people, yet that is not enough. We are special in the eyes of God, yet that is not enough. It says only through faith in Jesus. So we have also believed in Christ Jesus in order to be justified by faith in Christ, not by works of the law, because by works of the law no one will be justified. It says, and you can try. You can try to be justified on your own. You can never be justified by God. You will never meet up to his standard. It says, but if in our endeavor, in verse 17, but if in our endeavor to be justified in Christ, we too were found to be sinners, is Christ a servant of sin? Certainly not. Okay, we tried, right? We tried it. We said, hey, here's the gospel, and now we're going to add something on to it, but we're adding on something to it that's worse. We're trying to add to it the law, so we're going to be justified by faith plus the law. That makes Christ a servant of sin. That's not how it works, Paul says. He says, for if I rebuild what I tore down, now pay attention to this, I prove myself to be a transgressor. How silly is it to build something and then tear it down and then rebuild it? Right? He says, I had this way of life that was causing me pain. It was getting me nowhere. I was trying to kill Christians, right? And I tore it down because God did this amazing, immaculate work in my life. And if I try to rebuild that, that makes me a fool. If I go back to that way of trying to live, I am a fool. And I can't because and then in verse 19 it says, for through the law I died to the law so that I might live to God. I tore it down, and when I tore it down, if it really happened, I'm not tearing it down so that I'm not saving pieces of it so that I can try to glue it back together or put it back up. It says, I've died to it. I've been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I live now in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God. He says, I'm not perfect. I still do lots of stuff wrong. Even Paul himself at times was a religious hypocrite. He says, but the life I live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, so I am justified, who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not nullify the grace of God, for if a righteousness were through the law, then Christ died for no purpose. If you could achieve if you could achieve the righteousness of God on your own, Paul says, then you would have done it. And God wouldn't have to send his Son. And this is what he's saying. One, don't be the religious hypocrite. Don't live one way. Rules for me are not the same as those for thee, right? Rules for thee, but not for me. Don't do it. Don't do it in church, right? We are told by Jesus to go and make disciples. And we do this by two ways. We baptize them. We baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, so they make a choice to turn away from their sin, to turn away from trying to achieve acceptance to God, and to turn to Jesus. And it says, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded, Jesus says. That's it. So it's not baptize and teach them to obey everything that Jesus commands, and then also put a lot of other rules on them. No face cards, no movies, whatever the thing is. I mean, here's the deal. If you disciple a person and you get them where they obey everything that Jesus commands, then maybe just go for it, right? Give them a couple other rules too, right? But good luck. Actually, don't. So don't be a hypocrite. Don't be one of those spies that Paul talks about in the meeting that's trying to turn people away. Don't do it as you raise kids, as parents. Now listen to me on this, parents and grandparents. Right, have rules. I mean, I'm not saying don't have rules. Have rules and be as strict of a parent as you are. I'm not telling you to not be strict or be strict. Everybody's got their own level of comfortability. Be as strict as you are. Here's what I want to, from the Word of God, I want to tell you. don't. Limit the hypocrisy. Limit it as much as you are able. Right? Limit it. Limit the hypocrisy. Now there are going to be some things that you can do. If you and your spouse are over 21, you can consume alcohol. If you're over 18, you can smoke, right? You can do those things. And you can tell your child, hey, you are not 21, you are not 18, you cannot do that. Okay, I mean, that's not, I mean, you're also, when your 5-year-old says, hey, Mom, can I drive the car? You're like, no, let's don't do that, sweetie. You're not, of the right age. I won't trust you until you're like 41, probably, to drive my car. So whatever, right? Like, I mean, there are some, if you and your spouse are married, you are free to have sex. And you can say, hey, child, you are not allowed. Sex is within the confines of marriage. Like, you need to do that, right? Those are perfectly okay to be hypocritical in that. But if you have a hard time explaining it, you might want to rethink it. Right? And if you struggle around something, because sometimes sometimes you make a rule, like if you have been an alcoholic, and so the rule in your house is we will not have alcohol. That's a fine rule. That's a fine rule. If you have struggled with financial problems, so it's like the rule is we will only deal in cash. We won't have cards. We won't have, fine rule. Explain it. And be as transparent as is appropriate. You maybe don't want to tell your 5-year-old of all your drunken revelry, right? Or that, it's 7, maybe you don't want to tell them that, mommy and daddy blew all their money at the casino. Like, I mean, maybe you don't do that. But you tell them, hey, we have a problem with, this is for us. This is not because Jesus says that credit cards are bad, or this is not because Jesus said, if you drink, you can't go to heaven, or whatever it is. Good Christians don't do this. I had a person at church tell me this one, not at this church, at a church in Texas, well, we don't wear shorts. I was like, well, we do. He's like, no, we don't wear shorts here. I said, well, like, why? It's Dallas. It's hot. They're dressy shorts. I promise you my legs aren't causing anybody to stumble. Like they weren't up real high, they were down, they were dress shorts. And it was hot. He's like, well, we just don't do that. It's a bad rule. Rethink it. It's a bad rule. Now, hey, if you have a dress code, you have a dress code. I get it. Apply it to everybody. Parents, be transparent. Be transparent, as is appropriate, and limit the hypocrisy. Right, as you lead things, be transparent. As you lead in whatever you lead in at your work, your groups, whatever it is, be transparent. Avoid this religious hypocrisy. And when you see it, call it out. Call it out. Do so with love. Do so relationally. Do so with truth behind it. But call it out. I would say for me, and this is not me, I think a lot of things I could have avoided a lot of hardships if I would have actually called things out as I was younger. I could have avoided a lot of hardship that I inflicted on myself trying to conform to things or being really mad about something. Well, how dare they make me follow this rule? And then, come to find out 5 years later, oh, there was like a pretty good reason for that. But I didn't ever call it out, so I couldn't understand why. I didn't ever call it out, so they never got a chance to repent. I never called it out, and so they kept on perpetuating that thing that, Paul says this hypocrisy. It leads people astray. Do not be part of the building back up of things you tore down, of ways of life that do not get you where you want to go. Don't be one that says, rules for thee and not for me. Now here's my final word on this. Obedience is an absolute part of Christianity. But it is not the part that gets you in. It is not the part that makes you acceptable to God. The gospel says, I am accepted, therefore, out of a grateful joy, I obey. Once my life has been changed, it will turn my heart towards God, and it will be a joy to obey Him, not a drudgery. Because moralism and legalism says, I obey and therefore I have to be accepted. And my motivation is I want to stay accepted. You see, the Christian obeys God because he cares for him and because he gets God. And the Christian obeys because it is God transforming him into the likeness of Jesus Christ. And we're going to talk about that later. So do not be a religious hypocrite. Don't create any. Don't hurt people. Don't be the person that I hear about or the person that we hear about at Grace Church, like, oh, so-and-so, that church person or that church, they really hurt me because they operated very hypocritically. Don't do it. Try your best. Rely on the Spirit of God. Call it out and let God transform you just like He did for Paul and so many of us. Let's pray. Father, we thank You that You call us not to be hypocrites but consistent, and that the gospel is for everyone. Father, help us make true disciples, not hypocritical ones. Help us to be not like the Pharisees, the thing that we want to be so often. But Father, help us be authentic and follow Your gospel. Thank You for Your Son, Jesus. In Jesus' name, amen. Love you guys. See you next week.